Hello again, and welcome to our week 2 of political economy. I'm happy to be with you again. I hope you enjoyed the first week. I hope that you enjoyed the first lecture and also found the material and the assignments and the quiz interesting and fun. So, welcome to week 2. This week we're going to continue our discussion on some of the more important concepts in economics. This week we're going to focus on some elements that are important in microeconomics, and also, of course, talk about what is on tap for this week as far as deliverables, right? As far as the assignments and the quiz. So let's start with that. Just want to talk a little bit about what you have to do for this week. Okay, so for this week, we have the theme of this week is microeconomics and the theory of the firm. We're going to talk about market structures. What do these mean? Factor markets, land, labor, capital, and the distribution of income. And on that note, we'll talk about something called the Gini coefficient, and think about equity versus efficiency, or equality versus efficiency, and how do those two forces kind of come together. Then you have, for reading, as far as your reading assignment, you have chapter 2 in the textbook, and then, of course, the lecture, right? The lecture, which is what we're doing now. And please watch the video on the distribution of wealth and the Gini coefficient. And then, of course, you have your written assignment, income distribution exercise. And please continue doing your research and writing for the critical assignment at the end of the course. And don't forget your week 2 discussion board and the quiz that is also due for this week. Okay, so please don't forget those deliverables. As always, if you have any questions, you can reach me anytime, most anytime, through WhatsApp. I provided my phone number. You can ask me a question to WhatsApp, and I usually answer very quickly. Or you can write me an email and ask me a question there. All right? Okay, so let's get started talking about this material for the week. Okay, so let's begin by talking about or giving an overview of microeconomics. Okay, there seems to be if you when you talk to people and you talk to them about micro and macro. At times you get the answer that micro is the little economics and macro is the big picture, okay? And that is only half true. And I say that it's only half true because when you think about market structure, for example, when you're thinking about supply and demand for an entire market, or when you think about comparing monopoly to perfect competition, you're talking about the entire economy. There's nothing small or little about it. There's nothing micro about it. Microeconomics is just a different approach to economics. Macro looks at different factors like GDP and inflation and unemployment, growth, whereas micro looks at consumer behavior, prices. It looks at market structure. Okay, so it's just a different study, a different examination of the economy. Okay, so micro explains how prices are determined in the marketplace. It explains the forces of supply and demand. Okay, what's behind those forces, and it's concerned mostly with how the market brings about a what we call a market clearing condition, where supply equals demand. That's what we say when the market clears. All right. So these two forces, right, supply and demand, okay, what does it mean? Well, demand is what people want, what people desire, whether it's goods or services, and supply is what producers are willing to supply of those goods and services. Okay, so demand is not how much money we have, it's not how much money we've spent, but how much we are willing to spend. How much do we have in disposable income, for example? Okay. The law of demand says that as prices fall, the quantity demanded rises. As prices rise, the quantity demanded decreases. Okay, that's why the demand curve has a negative slope, a downward slope, right? On the other hand, supply has an upward slope. It goes up to the sky. So think about demand goes down, okay, D for down, demand, and supply to the sky. Okay, those are kind of easy ways to remember supply and demand. Supply to the sky, demand down. Okay, so supply illustrates the quantity of a good that firms are willing to supply at each of the possible prices. Okay, and so the supply curve goes up, so it has a positive slope. Okay, so a couple of concepts here to look at. The first one is, what does it mean when we say the market clears, or the concept of clearing the market? Okay, well, the concept of clearing the market just means that the number of buyers and the number of suppliers, or better yet, the number of units supplied exactly equals the number of units demanded. Okay, and so at that point the market clears, because at that point the market intersects. You've seen the supply and demand graphs perhaps at some point in your careers. At that point of equilibrium, which is that intersection, price is in equilibrium and quantity is in equilibrium. Okay, so that's what we mean by the market clearing. Now, as far as the rationing mechanism, that is the price mechanism, what it does is it establishes a price, and based on that price, it establishes then a quantity that is demanded or supplied. And it's called the rationing mechanism because what it ends up doing is it ends up creating a situation where some people are going to be able to buy at that price and some are not. Maybe the price is too high, so it's going to exclude many buyers. On the other hand, if the price is if the price is low, it's going to ration also, because suppliers will not be willing to supply those goods to the market at low prices. So it will create shortages, okay? And so the price mechanism, the price system, is a rationing mechanism of sorts, okay? So this is another in economics. All right, so we've talked about supply and demand. We've talked about how the price mechanism becomes a rationing mechanism. Now, it depends also to what extent price and quantity is controlled by those individuals supplying goods and services, and the buyers in the market depends on the market structure. We have four main types of market structures in economics. We have perfect competition, we have monopoly, we have monopolistic competition, and we have oligopoly. Okay, so what do these mean? All right, what are these, and what are the differences between these types of competition? Okay, or these types of market structure. So let's look at these closely. All right. First, the perfectly competitive or a perfect competition situation or market structure is one where you have many firms. This is the perfect competition. You have many firms, many suppliers, and you have many buyers, many people wanting to buy goods and services. And so what you end up with is many buyers and many sellers. Why do we call that perfect competition? Well, we call it because firms have to compete for buyers, which means they have to compete on price in order to be able to sell their quantities. We call firms in this type of scenario price takers. They take the price that is given from the market. They are not price setters. Okay? So perfect competition is characterized by individual firms being price takers and many, many buyers and many, many sellers. Okay, now as far as the other market structures, we have the monopoly. Monopoly is characterized by one seller, okay, where the seller has complete control of price and quantity, okay? Usually these monopolies you will see, for example, I'm sure you've seen them in your daily lives and experience. For example, the power company, the cable company. Okay, these are natural monopolies. All right. You also have public roads. The providers of public roads are natural monopolies as well, because there is not a free market for public roads, and so you don't have private entities, private actors providing public roads or providing roads for that matter. The state provides, right? And so you have natural monopolies. Okay, these are characterized by either high barriers to entry and high fixed costs. Right. Then you have another type of structure called monopolistic competition. And monopolistic competition is that type of structure where you have goods and services being similar but differentiated. So, for example, think about detergent. All right, detergent is detergent, right? But why do we buy Tide instead of Avery or whatever? I right now I don't remember the other brands of detergent, right? But there's so many, right? Not hundreds, but there's at least 10 different types of detergent that we could buy. Well, they're very similar, right? They all pretty much do the same, but they're differentiated based on what they do. How do they leave clothing smelling, right? The smell, the texture, how they treat whites, and all of these different types of product differentiation. Marketing becomes very, very important for these types of markets, market structure, products inside these types of market structures. Then we have the fourth market structure, and that is oligopoly. Okay, and oligopoly, the word oli means several. Okay, and so it's like a monopoly, which means one. Mono means one, but oli means several. Oligopoly means several, and usually we find these in expressed like, for example, cartels. If you are familiar with the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, for example, the OPEC, right, which is the cartel that manages the market for oil in the world, right? Mostly Arab nations. You also have Venezuela in there as part of the OPEC, right? And so cartels are a type of oligopoly where you have only a few firms controlling the market. You can think about the airlines as an oligopoly, or at least they used to be, right? Way back in the days where you only had a few airlines, right? Nowadays you have so many, it's no longer considered an oligopoly. It's actually much more either monopolistic competition, because they all provide the same service or the same product in terms of they all have the same type of plane, right? They all use 737s, they all use 777s, they all buy the same planes from Boeing or Airbus, what have you, but they all provide a different type of product, right? Whether it's bigger seats or free luggage or what have you. So they're much more they align with a monopolistic competition type of market structure than they would oligopoly. Back in the days of before deregulation, you could think about the airline industries as a much more oligopoly type of a market structure. So these are the four market structures. Okay, now, economics does a very good job in trying to explain phenomena, in trying to explain how market forces function, and generally speaking, the economy, the market will allocate goods and services in the most efficient manner possible. After all, right, those who want things the most are the ones that are most willing to pay for things. Those who want high quality are the ones that are going to pay higher prices for that. And those who can provide the services in the best way and the most efficient and highest quality are the ones whose goods are going to end up being bought and sold in the market. However, that is not always the case, and often we are faced with things we call market failures. All right, and so what are market failures? Well, market failures, by definition, is when the free market is unable to deliver what it expects to deliver, the expected benefits. Okay, we often refer to this as a non-Pareto efficient outcome. Okay, non-Pareto comes from the term Pareto efficiency, which is named after the great Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto. Okay, Vilfredo Pareto. He came up with this term Pareto efficiency, and it is what we economists and what economists seek to obtain. All right. Now, what are the causes of market failure? All right. Well, we have several causes of market failure. We have public goods. All right. Public goods. Goods that are what are public goods? The basic definition of public goods are goods that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous in consumption. Okay, so what does this mean, non-excludable and non-rivalrous? Well, it means that you cannot exclude anybody from consuming it. Okay, so air, for example, is non-excludable. Free air or clean air, right, is non-excludable. And then non-rival in consumption means that your consumption of it does not in any way, shape, or form reduce the enjoyment or the benefit that another person gets from consuming that good or service. So start thinking about a public good that you are familiar with. There are a few they're out there, but they are not all. Or they're not as easily identified because they either meet one of the criteria of excludability, but not the rivalry criteria, or vice versa. Okay. Now, public goods, not to confuse these with public utilities, right? Please don't make that mistake. Public goods does not mean the electric company. It does not mean the water company, because these both are excludable. Okay? If you don't pay your power, they cut it off, right? The power company cuts it off. So you can, in fact, exclude consumers from it. Okay? Roads, public roads. People say, well, they're non-rival because my consumption of it does not rival yours. Yes, but to a point, right? To a point, because what happens if the entire city decided to get on that road at the same time? Then it would be very rivalrous, right? Then my consumption would certainly be affected by your consumption, and the enjoyment and the benefits would certainly be reduced. So please don't make the mistake of thinking about things that are publicly provided as necessarily public goods, because they may not be. All right. So you have public goods. You have also the free rider problem. Okay, this is another cause of market failure, and it's associated with public goods. And what is the free rider problem? Well, it's the problem that arises when something is not charged for, something is not paid for. You end up with an over extraction of it, an over consumption of it, and people free riding, right? There's always going to be that one person or that those people that are going to take of this or consume of it or benefit from it without paying for it. So this is why it's so difficult to have the market provide these types of goods. Okay? What are some classic examples of public goods? The easiest one, I guess, just to use is defense, is national defense. Okay, you cannot exclude the citizens of Iowa from enjoying from the national defense provided by the United States government you can't exclude them, even if they didn't pay any taxes for it, or even if they didn't want to support it. You couldn't exclude them. You also, the fact that they don't want it, they don't want to pay for it, the fact that others benefit from national defense does not rival another person's benefit from national defense, right? So one state's enjoyment does not limit another state's. One person's enjoyment of the protections does not reduce another person's enjoyment, okay? So defense, clean air, and water are, generally speaking, public goods, okay? Now, public goods are quote unquote good, right? Sometimes, and they produce bads sometimes, and we call these goods externalities. These good, positive, third effects or secondary effects from the provision of these goods, they produce these positive externalities. But they can also produce negative externalities. Okay, these costs that are not borne by the producer of the externality or by the consumer, in fact, of the externality. Okay, so we have negative externalities, we have positive externalities. Continuing on with market failures, more causes of market failures. Well, we have macroeconomic instability. Okay, that's a cause for market failure. And why is that a cause for market failure? Well, because when we have instability, we have uncertainty. We have a problem of information. We don't know how to wage risks, for example, how to determine the amount of risk. We might then overshoot interest rates, for example, or prices. That's why sometimes you see, for example, what happened in the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, people went crazy buying toilet paper. All right. Why? Because there was uncertainty. There was this unknown about the implications of the COVID-19 virus, and then people began to buy toilet paper, thinking that one of the impacts of the virus was stomach problems, right? Diarrhea and that sort of thing. And so you end up with these types of situations because you lack the information. You have asymmetric information, we call incomplete information. It's here, and so you end up with these market failures. Macroeconomic instability leads to problems of unemployment, of inflation. Inflation eats away at real value, so that produces market failure. And of course, when you have unemployment, it also leads to market failure because the private markets are unable to provide the job market necessary to employ everybody. Okay. You also have other sources of market failure, and those are natural monopolies. For example, railroads and electric grids. Okay. These are natural monopolies, and the definition of a natural monopoly is that for which it is the provision of that good or service is much more cost efficient for one firm to produce it than it would be for multiple firms, and also in terms of allocative efficiency. Think about it: if electric grids or power lines were privately provided by a bunch of providers, right? Think if there were 1,000 suppliers of power lines, we'd have the entire country just filled with power lines all over the countryside. Well, that would be not only would it be horrible to see, to look at, but it would be a very inefficient use of land. So a natural monopoly is that type of a provider or of a firm for which it makes more sense to have one provider and not many. Okay, so these are some of the sources of market failures. As you can see here, perverse expectations, okay, fear of euphoria, fear of rising prices, rumors. All right, these are all things that generate uncertainty. They generate chaos. They generate euphoria, and people begin to act irrationally, so to speak, because they simply don't know what's happening. These are sources of market failure. All right. Now, let's go from the definitions of market failure and such to other important concepts that affect the market and can affect the market being able to clear, okay? And that's deregulation, okay? Deregulation was a very important concept in the United States, specifically as it related to the airlines. And you might have heard before deregulation of the airlines, right? Before deregulation of the airlines, by the way, you had airlines quality as far as food and meals and even the size of the seats of an airline. People at the time used to claim that they were very, very good quality. The quality was much better. The food was much better. The seats were much better. But it all came at a price, right? It came at a price, literally and figuratively speaking. It was higher prices, okay? And so these airlines were operating as oligopolists, okay? So they could charge higher prices because there were only a few firms, and so they could fix prices amongst themselves, okay? But all of a sudden, here came deregulation, where the government stepped in and said, no more, guys. Now we have to open up the market, the industry for everybody. And so you saw a free fall in prices, but you also saw a free fall in quality. The seats, as you know well, right? Think about the size of coach, right? The comfort of coach. You're very crowded, very small seats. Airlines are always continuously trying to jam in more passengers into these planes because they're trying to maximize their revenue, right? Trying to get more people in for that same size of an airplane. And so, and of course, now cutting down on the quality of meals. Now seems like you have to buy everything, right? You don't get any free meals. You don't get any free drinks. You don't get luggage fees, right, are now extra. And so this is all the product of higher competition. More competition means that the profit margins have shrunk so much that the only way for these airlines to be able to maintain their profit margins is to cut down on the costs. All right, and that's what's happened, right? So deregulation, very, very important concept, especially these days. All right, let's look at another concept, and that's production. This is related to the supply side, okay? The supply side of economics. What are the factors of production? Well, the classical factors, as far as classical economics, the three classic factors of production: land, labor, and capital. And very briefly, these kind of speak for themselves, but land is, as David Ricardo used to call it, the original and indestructible powers of the soil. That's how he used to describe the real value of land. And so by this, why is land valuable? Because it generates rent, right? You own land, you rent the land, you build a building, and that building is then rented, and you are able to enjoy rent. Okay, so land is a factor of production. Labor, measured in wages and salaries, right? Labor is a fundamental factor of production. Human capital is us. We are human capital, right? And human capital is driven by education, experience, and training, right? That's why we go to school. That's why we do higher education, right? That's why we do training, because we want to increase our human capital so that we can demand higher wages and salaries in the market. And then you have capital. What is capital? In the economic sense, capital is not so much money in and of itself, but rather productive capital, machines and buildings, right? Or machinery, like a truck, for example, would be capital. And you also have financial assets, but not money itself, but rather financial assets, like for example, a stocks and bonds, right? These are what we call in economics paid-in capital, right? This is capital in the financial sense because you use these financial assets to finance production, to finance output, to finance the purchasing of productive capital, right? Like, for example, you issue stock and bonds so that you can finance a new factory in Oklahoma, okay? So that's why we call this capital. And then the last one is entrepreneurship. This is another factor of production, not one of the original ones of the 19th century classical economists, but entrepreneurship was the idea that it's not sufficient just to have land, labor, and capital. You also need to have innovation. You need to have creativity. You need to have some kind of savviness that separates you from that other competitor, that other individual. And entrepreneurship has become a very important factor of production in this century. Okay, so we go from production and now to our last point, our last concept, and that is a concept that deals with distribution of income, production versus equity, or production versus equality, right? How do we balance out being a productive economy, but at the same time providing goods and services and providing welfare for the economy in its most equitable way, all right, and where equality will be maximized? Well, economists use a neat concept called the Lorenz curve, and this Lorenz curve is a graph that represents the equality of income distribution. It's how the income of a country is distributed among its citizens. Okay, and the Lorenz curve is unique in that if you see this graph here, you see the straight line. This is the line of equality. It's 45 degrees always. And then the Lorenz curve is that line of inequality. Okay, so it shows you how close or how far an economy is to providing a high degree of equality, income equality for its citizens, right? And of course, this is important because in a country like ours, right, the United States of America, it's a very rich country, and in general terms, high. If you look at the United States GDP per capita, for example, compared to China, while China may have a higher GDP, a gross GDP, or at least a comparable, very close to the U.S. I believe it's a little higher now than the U.S. But if you look at China's GDP per capita, meaning the GDP per person compared to the U.S., it's abysmal. I mean, the difference is considerable. We're talking a fourth of the U.S. And why is it? Well, it has to do with, obviously, population. Okay, but so what's important then is not so much as how much money you're producing, but how is that money distributed among the citizens that you have, so that most citizens, or as many as possible, are able to benefit from the gains that the economy produces. Okay, and so one last point about distribution of income, right, is we talked about the Lorenz curve. The other concept is this unique concept in economics called the Gini coefficient, all right? And this Gini coefficient is derived from the Lorenz curve, all right? And it's a statistical measure of inequality. It derives or produces the ratio of the area between the Lorenz curve and the straight curve. All right. So how do we interpret the Gini coefficient? Well, the ratio is a number between 0 and 1. So 0 is perfect equality and 1 is perfect inequality. So the higher the number, the greater the inequality. So obviously, those economies with 1 are the ones that are most unequal, right? The ones that have the highest discrepancy between income equality. The ones that are closer to 0 are the ones that are doing better, okay? The ones that are, at least in terms of equality, the ones that are doing better in terms of equality. So this is one way to interpret the Gini coefficient, okay? All right. Last but not least, okay, and we're headed to the end of our presentation here, and let's think about the importance of God and Christianity, right? And our Christian ideals, our Christian values, in talking about things, for example, like public goods and externalities, right? We're trying to produce outcomes in society for ourselves and for others that maximize the welfare and benefits for everyone, or at least for most people that we can, right? And that's where faith in God kind of come in and do a great job, right? Because faith is in many ways a public good, right? And if you think about the two requirements, or the two conditions, non-excludability and non-rivalness, faith is a public good, because you can't exclude anybody from having faith, right? If they have faith, they have faith. Even if you have faith, the fact that you have it doesn't take away from another person from having it. And it is non-rival in that the enjoyment and the benefit and the welfare and the security and that you get from having faith is non-rival to somebody else enjoying it as well and having that security and that benefit. So faith is a public good. And God is an infinite source of positive externalities, right? These are the ones that we seek to maximize. Think about all the positive, great things that our faith in Christ has on our lives, in our lives, and how it impacts us and those around us and other people. It keeps us on the right path. It encourages us to treat our fellow man with dignity and kindness, and to be stewards of Christ, and support others and support our families, and so the source of positive externalities that Christianity and faith have on the economy and on the market is tremendous. So I wanted to leave you with those thoughts. And as always, have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you, and God bless you. Bye-bye.